Greetings, everyone. How are you doing? I am Dr. Daphne Davis. I am the owner of Sya Academy, current owner of Sya Academy, which I inherited from my parents, William C. Davis. I had a blink there. William Edward and Sylvia C. Davis. My parents, who I always acknowledge. My father is transitioned, and so I want to remember my ancestors, and just acknowledge those who came before me and reason why I'm here. I'm going to put my earring on real quickly. So today I wanted to. I've mentioned Fort Mose a couple of times without actually diving deeply into what I know about them, about Fort Mose. I was introduced to Fort Mose through Sharon Draper's book, um, my Copper Sun, which is a novel that I had my students read back in, oh gosh, I've had it. I think I've known about that book about 10 years because I've had couple of children go, age groups, read through that book. And at the end of her book, she introduces Fort Mose as an alternative route in for the Underground Railroad for the young girl who was the main character of the story. She wants to run away, and she's told to go south instead of north. I think that the story takes place. It's a young girl who was captured in Ghana, and we learn about her journey across the ocean, and she ends up in South Carolina or Georgia, one of those two. But at any rate, um, she decides to run away with her white indentured servant friend, and they escape south instead of going north. And Fort Mose is where they end up. And Fort Mose is in Florida, and it has a lot of history with the Underground Railroad. And so, what I wanted to do is just start with a little bit of information I gathered from the National Park Service for the Castillo de San Marcos. So most of us know the Spanish, or a lot of us know, I hope, that the Spanish were the first group of Europeans to come to the States. And a lot of that is probably because they are of their contact with the Moors. So beginning, I think it was what, from 711 to 1492, the Moors were ruling Spain. And when we say Moors, a lot of times people want to think, well, they were Arabs, and or people of Arabic descent. But it was a combination of Africans, Black Africans, and Arabs, and who were part of that conquering. Who conquered Spain, who ruled Spain, who were part of the Moors, and Moors, I think, translates as black. So we know these are black people. A lot of them were black people. But anyway, they were in Spain from 711 to 1492. And of course, at 1492, they were able to drive. The Spanish were finally able to drive the Africans out. And we've been paying for that for a long time. But anyway, it's very interesting what you find as we do our study. And I would like to probably do a more in depth study about the Moors at a later time so we can understand the differences in colonialism. What happens when one group colonizes and then versus another group that colonizes. So, as it consequently, the approach to slavery was very different by from the Spanish. The Spanish were messy. I'm not going to say they were great because slavery is not great under any circumstances, but there was a more of a, like, if you converted to Christianity, they kind of, or Catholicism, they would, you could be free. Wherein in we know in Americas, if you converted to Catholicism or Christianity, They didn't mean it. They didn't mean it. They were you were not going to be free just because of that. Um, so the Black Moors were in Spain for 7 centuries, and so there was a history of Africans there, and but they came the first Africa. I mean, the first Spanish, the arrival of the Spanish was in 1513 to Florida, of what we call Florida. So they came to Turtle Island, or what we call America, and in the Florida area. And the first Africans who joined them were in 1513, and that was with Juan Ponce de Leon. Now, according to the National Park website, Castillo de San Marcos National Monument in Florida, St. Augustine was established September 8th, 1565. And in this group, it was about 800 people who came, and of the 800 colonists, uh, 50 of them were Africans, and I believe that some of them were free and some of them were enslaved. Now, when you think about that, most of us hear the date of, I think, 1607 is when, um, uh, I think the Pilgrims landed in whatever that group that landed up there, that a religious cult landed up there in Massachusetts. But we have 1619 as Jamestown, and I know 1607, something like that, is also the date for some early 1600 date was also for Virginia. But the first Africans were brought here in 1619, and of course, I think I've talked about how they were from the empire, Nzinga's empire, in Bundu in Angola. So I'm not sure where these Africans came from. I don't know if they were that the Spanish brought in 1565. I don't, yeah, 1565. I don't know if these were Africans who were the descendants of Moors, or if these were Africans that were also brought from um, African empires, African um, countries, and so I don't know, but they were free, and both free and unfree. And so about 54 years before Jamestown is when these Africans were arrived. So according to the records at Fort Mose, you have 1595 was when the first African American child was born there. 1598 is when the first African American marriage took place, and 1672 is when they began to construct the Castillo de San Marcos, which is also the name of Fort Mose. As British, now historically, um, the British, when they came, they first settled, in the Virginia area, then they came to Carolinas, and then they began to they infiltrate Georgia. Now, what happened is when they started coming, the closer they got to the Florida territory or wherever it was, that's when you started having military conflict between the British and the Spanish, which is also addressed in this book of Sharon Draper's book, Copper Sun. There was a lot of conflict. And so one of the sources of the conflict was that if Africans escaped into the Spanish territory, the Spanish would say, "Okay, you know what? Come in, accept Catholicism, get baptized, pledge your allegiance to the Spanish king, and guess what? Boom, you are free." And so this was driving the British crazy because what? These Africans found out that they could escape to Spanish Florida or Spanish territory, and they could be free. So while most people, and I was one of them, who learned about the Underground Railroad and the roads to the north, um, we now understand that there were also several routes that were to Texas and to Florida and to other Spanish holding areas. Africans could escape. So the Spanish did have a history of embracing Africans who were escaping from the British. And, I don't know if it's so much that they were about freedom as it was, uh, uh, you know, um, that's a way to make to make the British feel bad. I don't think it was necessarily, excuse me, a nod to the Africans as much as it was a way to aggravate and agitate the British. So let's see. So in 1687, the first record of Africans escaping into Fort Mose was 11 enslaved Africans. There was most of them were men, and I think one of them was a small infant. And once in Florida, like I said, they were able to go through this process, and of course, they were immediately granted their freedom. 1695 records show that Africans were, once they began to get more ingrained in that community, they were now able to work, and they were not free labor, they were now paid labor. In 1726, the Florida's Governor Antonio de Benavides establishes the first African American militia. Now, it there's no indication of whether any of these people were unfree, but it may have been a militia of enslaved Africans. So in 1738, which is about 12 years later, the governor Manuel de Manciano establishes Grace Red de Santa Teresa de Mose as the first free African American settlement. I think that at that time it was only about 100 people who were running this settlement. And of course, there was historically, there were uh, people of all races that were part of this settlement. Indigenous people were there, African people were there, and some free white people were there as well. But if the record shows that it was not it was a free black town run by black people, but there were also um people for a different groups of people, and it was a multiracial space. um let's see, the first captain of Fort Mose was an African Mendinque man named Francisco Menendez, and he was a former a slave of the British. He escaped apparently, and he became in 1738. He was the person who was the captain of Fort Mose. Um, so, like I said, there were a lot of battles now between the British and the Spanish in that fort, which is why they had to create the militia, and they created the African militia to protect their space. The British uh, came in 1740. They had a whole war there, and the Spanish pretty much abandoned the Africans there, but they fought, and the fort was dismantled, and people were forced to leave. And it took almost 20 years. It looks like 1759 that Africans went back in and rebuilt the fort. Um, and they were there until 1763, and when the British came back, and I think they came back, and this time they destroyed Fort Mose, and so the people decided to move to Cuba, and so um we have that history of these people. But what I wanted to do real fast is um take a little detour. There are two things. The Africans were engaged in this. They only have one record. I think it's in what 16 what is it 1687 when 11 Africans escaped. But there was a continuous, I don't know how many people were escaped down to that place, down to Fort Mose from Georgia or from the Carolinas. But we do know that there was also I'm trying to think. It was Denmark Vesey, I think. Um, Fort Mose, and then I'm gonna try to see if I can pull it up. Fort Mose, and Denmark Vesey. And so many of you may have known about Denmark Vesey. Denmark Vesey was uh, let's see, Fort Mose and Denmark Vesey. Here it is. So Denmark Vesey was a African who in 1760s, no, who organized a huge insurrection. I think that was the insurrection. Let's see. He was in Charleston, South Carolina. He was self-educated, and he led the most extensive slave rebellion in U.S. history in Charleston in 1822. Now, they're not really showing the other part, but his relationship to uh, Fort Mose. Let's see if they show that. But the Stono Rebellion. Okay. So St. Augustine. Oh, I got it. I found it. So the Stono Rebellion, you can look at this, visit St. Augustine, and it says here, how is the Stoner Rebellion connected to St. Augustine? So we already know that Charleston was 1670. So 1670, and let's see what happened. 1672. So the Spanish were down there from the 1500s. By 1672, they established their Castillo de San Marcos. So you got these Africans who had some autonomy over their lives, who were running, pretty much running this Fort Mose was the first free African town. So here they are. It says it lies nearly 300 miles north. So Charleston is 300 miles north of St. Augustine, Florida. But let's see. Let's see. What was done? So their connection was that they were going to. Oh, it's not showing me. Oh my goodness. But okay, maybe it's in the visit. So at any rate, it's believed that Denmark Vesey had found a way to communicate with the folks down in South Carolina. So let's see. Let's see. What was this? The Stono Rebellion. Oh, what date was that? Fort Mose. They were going to join Fort Mose, and this was written by Peter H. Wood, and they found out that they were going to create a plan of coordination between these two places. So you got 1738, and then this happened in 1739. So you can see that they had been that they knew about each other. And so there was going to be the plan was apparently for Africans to find their way. Is there laundry rebels murdered? And headed southwest, apparently with Spanish St. Augustine on the Florida coast as their ultimate destination. So they were headed. A band of enslaved men attacked a store near the Stono River, roughly 17 miles below Charlestown, South Carolina, and they executed two men, seized a cache of arms, and headed southwest, apparently with Spanish St. Augustine on the Florida coast as their ultimate destination. So they were headed, this rebellion, that the Stono Rebellion that was led by Denmark Vesey, that was one of the places that people were planning to escape to. Um, Insurgents pressed south along the Pom Pom Road, beating drums and raising chants of liberty. And but we know that the eventually the white majority, I mean the white minority, was able to eventually seize them because they were able to get the British, militia to help them to stop this rebellion. But there is a connection between, other than, not only was it Underground Railroad, but the Fort Mose was a part of Denmark Vesey's plan. It was for as a place that folks could escape to get away from, to escape slavery, and also probably if to empower that area and make it even more of a force against the enslavement of our people. But it didn't work. But it's good to know, for us as people, to know that our ancestors were constantly fighting. No one was accepting enslavement as this was it and we don't have to fight. And that's the way the narrative is presented a lot of times in our curriculum. Like I said, in the standard curriculum, people don't know who Denmark Vesey is. They don't present Toussaint Louverture. They don't present Nat Turner. And if they do, it's a little glib and they tell you about 5 seconds and they're on to the next thing. And a lot of this is, I read somewhere, I can't remember where it was, but in 1776, or when Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, the Africans down there in Florida, the ones who were still there, ripped up the Declaration of Independence when it came to them, because they're like, you are trying to free yourself, but you're not trying to free, the Africans that are here. So they immediately recognized the hypocrisy of that document. But it's just interesting how our ancestors, um, even when they came here, a lot of us don't think of our people are speaking Spanish. That you have a whole Afro Latino heritage in Florida that predates Florida, as a part of the United States, that predates um, the 1619, where the first 20, they have 20 Africans coming to the States, and we're in the 1500s, they had 50. So it may have been a larger population of folks, but it's just interesting. It's just interesting. And to know that that was also a haven. Like I said, the Spanish colonies were havens of freedom for Africans. And while in the Caribbean, it was brutal. In Cuba, it was brutal. We know that they had sugarcane. Sugarcane was, woo, it was something else. And so we know a lot of people were dying under sugarcane. The British did sugar cane also, and that was one of the most. I mean, we had cotton in the States, but sugarcane, people, the life expectancy for people who worked in sugarcane was about 3 to 7 years. 3 to 7 years, because to harvest, uh not harvest it, but to grow it, it requires significant amounts of dung. And so dung, and so they were actually having to use the dung, and and till it and get it into the soil, and you know feces. This is feces. This is cow feces. This is human feces. Animal feces. It was necessary, and so this stuff was not. Golly. You think about it. Penetrating the lungs. It's penetrating pores. If you got any kind of cuts, it's in your bloodstream, and so it was. And how can you protect yourself if you're literally working in dung? And so yeah, they knew that these people were dying, and that's the reason why they had to keep going to Africa to get more of our people, because they knew that they were literally killing us, wiping us off the planet. And while yes, they did have slavery in Africa, we know that. But what they didn't do is treat people inhumanely. And I went through that in the Mandan Charter, and even the Hunter's Oath that when I presented. There was this desire for freedom, and this idea of inhumane treatment. You could not treat people inhumanely. That was it's written that you could not humiliate people. And our ancestors, I just don't. I think that they had no idea who these people were that were coming to get these Africans. They had no idea that that's what um, was going to happen, because in Africa, you were only enslaved if you owed debt, or if you were a prisoner of war, or you committed some kind of crime. And then, even if those, you had to work it with in the family. You could marry into the family. We could not do that in America. You could not marry. You couldn't even look at a white woman. You could own property. Black people were property. So we could not own anything. Nothing belonged to us, not even our own children. In Africa, you could have children. Your children were yours. You did. They were not enslaved. You could be the descendant of enslaved person, but you didn't necessarily have to be a slave if you were a descendant of these. We know here you had chattel slavery. If your mom was a slave, if your daddy was a slave, you were a slave. So there were so many uh, concepts about unfree people that were completely different from what between the European worldview and the African worldview. And unfortunately, it took Africa a minute to understand what was going on. And we find out, like in the 1600s, and Zingo is like, why are y'all coming back? Why are you coming back here? And we know about Benin, and we know about Nigeria. And Africans are like, y'all, y'all, what are you doing? Why are you back? If we sent you these people, why are you back here asking for more? So that was when this resistance to enslavement began to take place, because Africans did not understand it, and it was not their mindset of enslavement was not the same as the European system or understanding of it, and we had no idea. I just think Africans had no idea, and when they finally did, it was too late. And now they had created these systems of trade that it was hard to get out of. And then of course, even they had this reprieve from enslavement, but it was too late, because now you have the British, and the British have seen all your gold, and the British have seen all of your salt and sugar, all of your trade, all of your fabric. And now they're like, we ain't going back to Europe, we're coming back in here. And that's when you have the 1800s with Ya Santua fighting in Ghana, and you have Shaka Zulu fighting with the British in South Africa. So this is when you start hearing about all these wars and these skirmishes on the continent. And I think that it was late 1800s when the Europeans finally got complete control of Africa. But then they had, by the 1960, within about not even 100 years later, Africans were trying to kick them out and regaining control of their land. But unfortunately, we got to also get rid of these boundaries of Nigeria and Cameroon, and Benin and Angola, and Congo. We got to get rid of that and go back to where we had our own ethnic groups operating in these spaces. We're going to reclaim it, but if the Moors were in Spain for 700 years, that means that we've had this European contact for what? It's been almost 600 years. And so everything comes to an end. And I think we are witnessing the end of European domination. And when we compare, when I come back next week and talk about the Moors, we'll be able to see what happened when Africans went to Europe, and how what did they do for Europe, and compare that to what happened to the indigenous people here in the States, and the indigenous and the Africans here. And so we'll have that conversation next week. I say.
I'm a St. Sya student. Of course I walk into the sound of drums.
I'm a St. Sya student. Of course I know my mother.
I'm a St. Sya student. Of course I can play the drums.
I'm a St. Sya student. Of course I can work with my hands.
I'm a St. Sya student.
You know how people love to enjoy food and don't understand how to flavor their food or how to replicate a meal? They're interested in supplements but don't know where to begin? Well, what I do is I take the guesswork out of enjoying flavor and wellness with my flavorful spice blends so that they can create delicious meals with healing benefits. Can Do Spice was created to help cooks at any level enjoy healing through food. Every spice blend was designed to give added health benefits of natural herbs. Every blend is complete. There's no need to add any additional spice for a delicious meal. Saving you time and money while adding supplements to your meals can be both tasty and fun. My earliest memories in the kitchen began with my father, Kenny Can Do Bond, so it was fitting that I would name this line after him. I have always looked to natural remedies to supplement the body, and I found myself hiding herbs and minerals in foods for my family. That's when it hit me. Everyone needs Can Do Spice. Everyone should be having this. It's an exclusive brand for cooks at any level who want to create flavorful dishes with healing benefits that can satisfy the body and soul. Add a little spice to your life. Give Can Do Spice a try.